The Lonely God From Visions by Coulson Kernahan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by David Leeson. The Lonely God. A man lay on his bed at midnight, and dreamt that he stood alone by the sea, and that his hour of death was nigh. From the gates of night and across the sea there blew a wind that made him shiver less with physical cold than with a sense of soul desolation and loneliness, a wind which chilled the heart of him even more than the body. And as he looked up to the sky and stars his lonely spirit, losing itself in the infinite abyss, turned sick and giddy at the thought of dying, and reeled shuddering to earth again. Then the man thought of the woman he loved, the wife of his heart and mother of his children, and that if he and she might but die together, if he might but set out with her hand in his, he should no longer fear to make death's journey. And even as he so thought, he awoke with pounding heart and panting breath, awoke to shudder at the darkness and the loneliness, and with a nameless fear lying at the center of life, like the lurking shadow of an unknown, unseen foe. As he lay he heard the low breathing of his sleeping wife, and with a sigh of relief, and with all sense of lonesomeness gone, the man closed his eyes and fell asleep. Again he dreamed a dream, in which he thought that he stood in the presence of God. Whether he had been born to the infinite regions which stretch on and away, and yet again away, beyond the limits of our universe, or whether he were still on the earth, or had soared to a distant star, or to the vast and void sky spaces that lie between the worlds, or had crept into the narrow chamber of the human soul, the man knew not. But he was aware in some wonderful way of all that was taking place on all God's myriad worlds. He saw circling planets sweep faster and faster on their ever-narrowing orbit, until at last they fell and flew, like moths to a candle, to feed the flaming furnace of the sun, and he looked upon his own home, and saw the billowy rise and fall of his wife's bosom, and heard the cry of the child who lay in a cot by her side. He gazed upon burnt-out worlds, moons that had once been astir with life, and heard their cooling and cinderous surfaces crack into chasm and cave, and he looked into the bowels of the earth, and saw strange creatures breeding and sporting amid the central fires. He watched comets, those vagabonds of the heavens, wandering gypsy-like between the worlds, or weaving outlying system to outlying system, like nebulous shuttlecocks of the skies, and he saw into the secret workings of human souls. He looked upon the planet Jupiter, that laboratory of God, and beheld moving athwart the thin atmosphere, strange shapes, uncanny as a half-formed, prematurely born babe, that seemed neither spirit nor flesh, but which he knew were the soul embryos of creatures which, developing by progressive stages and from age to age, should in the eons to be, become beings infinitely greater than man, and scarcely less glorious than God, and he peered beneath the earth's surface, and watched the anxious running to and fro of innumerable ants. Then raising his head the man looked into the eyes of God, and saw eternity lying therein. And at that sight the man fell back with a cry like that of one smitten by the lightning, and with the very soul of him sick and swooning with fear. But in a voice of infinite tenderness, God spake, bidding him be of good cheer. And God said, "Art thou he who feared death because of its loneliness?" And the man said, "I am he." And to him the Almighty spake again, "Thou diest alone, but I live alone, and as is the sound which thou hearest in the hollow convolutions of a shell, to the roar of the central sea, so is thy loneliness to mine. When God throws his arms around a soul and draws that soul away from its companions, and to himself, then is that soul very lonely, but the loneliness is but the being gathered to the heart of God." Then said the man, By thee all that is in heaven above or in the earth beneath was created. Thou hast but to speak the word, and lo, a legion of angels are at thy side, to bear thee company by night or by day." But God made answer, "That which I create, be it angel or archangel, is but my creature, and can never be my companion." And again the man, "Thou art God the Eternal One, ruler of earth and sea. Is it nothing to thee that all men worship thee and hold thee in reverence?" But to him the Almighty made answer, "The thought of God is, to most men, but a plank to which they hope to cling when the waters of death are closing over their heads. How many are there, thinkest thou, who love the God they have never seen, as thou lovest thy wife and child?" And the man said, "Thou hast but to say the word, and behold, all men must love thee." But God answered him, "For the love which I compel, I care not." Then said the man, "Thou art God, the Omnipotent One. Sun, moon, and stars sprang into being at thy bidding. Thou hadst but to say, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And thou didst but breathe upon inanimate clay, and lo, it became an immortal soul, clothed in a form divinely fair, and fashioned in thine own likeness. And man, the heir of eternity and image of God, came into being. To thee all things are possible. Thou hast but to say 'Let be,' to set at thy side another God, like even unto thyself, that so thou mayst be alone no more." And yet again God said, "That which I create is but my creature, and can never be my companion, and from my loneliness, even mine own omnipotence is powerless to deliver me. Rememberest thou not of him who was slain on Calvary, that men taunted him, saying, He saved others, himself he cannot save? Even so from the loneliness wherefrom God saveth others, himself God cannot save. The cry in loneliness that rang from Calvary's cross rings throughout creation still. Thou lookest out into the night, and thou shudderest, not because of the blackness that broods between earth and sky, but because thou hast looked, as into an abyss, into the lonely soul of God. Nature is lonely because of God's loneliness. On every breeze is born, were the ear of man attuned to hear it, the sound of innumerable lamentations, which is nature's echo of God's lonely cry. God shudders, and over the shining surface of the sea a sudden tremor flits. God hides his countenance, and the sunshine fades from meadow and field, and darkness covers the face of the sky. But on the shadowless shining peaks of eternity, God sits lonely forever, and into his loneliness neither man nor nature can enter; nay, of such loneliness as God's, the soul of man cannot even conceive, for man's death is not more lonely than God's life. I am the loneliness. The voice ceased, and the man awoke to know that he had been dreaming. Outside, the wind made moan continually, and from the tossing tree tops there came a sound like the ceaseless sighing of the sea. For one moment the man gazed into the black and brooding night, whence it seemed to him that the eyes of infinite sadness looked out of the darkness into his own. In the next, he had drawn the curtain and turned from the window, that in the warmth and light of the room, and in the caresses of his waiting wife, he might cease even to remember that he had dreamed a dream. Yet sometimes, as he stands and listens to the sea at midnight, there seems borne to him on every breeze a sound like that of innumerable lamentations, and then the man thinks again of his dream, and fancies that in sobbing surge and wailing wind he hears the cry of the lonely God. End of The Lonely God.